Large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, for once, Amazon.com failed to deliver. The city was not among the company's finalists for a new job-generating facility. We'll look tonight at what the state offered and at strategies for future economic wooing. We'll also examine the governor's proposed budget, the council backtracking on international politics, a controversy over tipping at restaurants, and the status of John Besch's hotel restaurants. And speaking of hotels, this is the weekend when Louisianians take over the Washington Hilton for the annual Mardi Gras Ball. We'll look toward the Potomac. In our court are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Stephanie Grace, columnist, New Orleans Advocate, Catherine Sayer, reporter, NOLA.com, The Times-Picayune, and Richard Thompson, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate. And we go to Richard first because we didn't get it, even though the state tried real hard.
Well, I don't think we can necessarily blame Amazon for not delivering this time. Ultimately, what we saw was that the online retail giant received more than 200 proposals from cities and states across North America for this potentially transformative project to host its second headquarters. And Louisiana jumped into the fray. Amazon was looking for proposals last October, and Louisiana put forth one that we finally got to see our first glimpse of this week. And the state had offered essentially 5 areas for Amazon to consider, 3 in New Orleans and 2 in the greater New Orleans area. In New Orleans itself, the state had put forward the possibility of building in the central business district, where it could either build a high-rise, take up space in an existing one, or potentially look at the VA or charity hospital. It also had suggested Bechtel Park in Algiers, or building on the UNO campus over at the lakefront. Beyond that, the state had also proposed space in St. Tammany Parish, as well as in Jefferson at the Churchill Technology and Business Park. And so, I mean, I think the state, and a lot of us realized that it was a long shot to begin with. The state, naturally, their perspective, I think, was that, and they've been mummed throughout the process, but that you want to go in, you want to put your best foot forward, even if this isn't the proposal that you're able to land. You want to make sure that you kind of get good face time with Amazon, let them know all the strengths that you have to offer, and there could be another opportunity down the line that may be a better fit, such as a warehouse they proposed, or different kind of logistics complexes that maybe would be more suited. And just what they were looking for, really, in a lot of ways, New Orleans or Louisiana, just if it fit the benchmark, just kind of barely fit. Like, Amazon was looking for an area with at least 1 billion people. They want, which, if you look at the greater New Orleans area, we're just kind of over. We do have some strengths in terms of, we have the port, we have Class 1 rail access that is unmatched in a lot of other areas. We've got a high demographic of millennials that are moving in that would want to take these jobs. But in other ways, it just didn't fit the bill in some sense.
And this was, once again, this for headquarters. This was not for a fulfillment center or anything. I mean, these were going to be high-paying jobs if we would have landed them.
These would have been potentially 50,000 high-paying jobs. Amazon's looking to pay, or to invest at least $5 billion into it. And then there's so much more money that would come from all the other businesses that just want to be located nearby.
So like 20 other cities made the short list out of the over 200 that had applied for it, because this is something that was highly desirable for an area to get. So give us an idea of, even though we didn't get it and we're not going to be involved in this deal, what was on the table if Amazon really did want to put us on the short list?
So ultimately what the state had offered was about almost $6.7 billion worth of incentives. And a lot of these are different payroll incentives that Amazon would have qualified for. And these were, for the most part, almost entirely all kind of off the book, off the shelf incentives that are authorized through programs that have been coming through Baton Rouge in the last few years, geared toward high-paying, competitive jobs in the digital media spectrum as well as workforce training. And so it's all kind of off the book programs. We just don't see them of this magnitude. It's not like a decade ago when Louisiana had this $500 million pot of money that they could dip into anytime they wanted to lure new business. This was programs that were already kind of out there.
And this would have been over a 20-year span. It's not like we would have said, here, what was it, $6.5 billion over the next 2 years, but over the next 20 years.
Yes.
Okay, so
What does this tell us about Brechtel Park, though? Is that in terms of the long-term vision that they're willing to put that in the mix?
Well, I think it says a lot. I mean, it's a space that's there. It makes sense being in Algiers, having that available. It could have been any number of these or combination of these spaces. It could have also included the CBD, which is where we're seeing DXC technology locate too. And the state would have been more than happy to look elsewhere too if this didn't suit Amazon.
So like you said, we didn't get this one, but we're on their radar now in case they would think of other things for us. That is what the state is saying right now.
I think all along the state was kind of hoping that we'd get on their radar, maybe a logistics terminal, one of these large warehouses that Amazon's been opening all over the country in the last few years that are less high profile naturally than one of these transformative projects, but still would create some jobs for the area and also move more product through.
So among the 20 on the short list, really big urban centers is essentially what they looked at.
Big urban centers, a lot of them are on the East Coast, and so we don't really fit that.
Their main headquarters is in Seattle right now.
That's right.
So they're looking to the East Coast, but also Austin. Austin was kind of close. Okay, thanks a lot, Richard. Over to Catherine right now. And when we go to restaurants, we leave a tip, or we should at any rate, for the servers who are working hard. And now there's sort of a controversy about that, about who really gets that tip. So there's a suit right now against Dat Dog. But we'll talk about that. But first, kind of quickly walk us through who does get that tip.
Well, more likely than not, that tip is being shared. That server is sharing that money with everyone who's kind of in the front of the house, who's dealing with customers. So that could include table bussers, bartenders. So that's really commonplace. Restaurant owners have the option to pay their front of house workers less than minimum wage, right? So minimum wage is $7.25. They can pay as low as $2.13 an hour for these tipped employees, with the idea that our tips make up for that gap, right? Whereas back of house employees, people in the kitchen, dishwashers, they're presumably making at least the full minimum wage of $7.25. Now these are the federal rules. As Louisiana does not have its own minimum wage law, so we sort of default to the federal law. So the lawsuit that was filed last month was filed by 2 bartenders at Dat Dog, and they're claiming that they're paid that lower wage, $2.13 an hour, but they're being forced to share their tips with those back of house employees who are presumably making the full $7.25 an hour, as well as they say they're having to tip to managers, which is not traditionally part of a tip pooling system. And so they're claiming this is an invalid tip pool, that this is illegal, and they're also saying, at the end of the shift, it's kind of cryptic how the managers have, calculated what their payout is. The Dat Dog has not formally responded in court yet. The co-founder and owner, in some brief comments to me, just said, hey, we're not a traditional restaurant. We don't have front of house, back of house delineation like that. And I think it really goes back to the bartenders are making $2.13 an hour. So what are they able, and what should they have to share?
And when your product is hot dogs, I couldn't imagine the tips being really big.
Yeah, I'm sure that alcohol is probably the biggest revenue generator for Dat Dog.
Yeah, some good tips on that, I'm sure. So, like you say, that the minimum wage is set by the federal government. State doesn't have its own. And there had been some guidelines set by the Obama administration, and then Trump has rescinded those, taken those away. How is that playing into it?
Related, but separately. So, on the West Coast, where like California, Alaska, Oregon, they have their own minimum wage laws, and they require restaurant owners to pay their tipped employees already at least $7.25, if not even more than that. So there's a debate, and there have been conflicting legal rulings about whether restaurant owners can take all those tips, if they pay all their staff at least minimum wage, if they can take all those tips and redistribute restaurant-wide. The Obama administration in 2011 came out and said, hey, we think that tipped employees, essentially what it is who owns the tips, right? So that they're saying the front of house owns the tips, even if their base pay is $7.25 an hour, managers can't take these tips and redistribute them. So the Trump administration late last year proposed a rule change. It's up for public comment right now, where they would change that. It's got big support from the National Restaurant Association, where, you know, if you're paying that a full minimum wage, restaurant owners can take it all and redistribute it all.
Okay. Are any restaurants going with a trend of no tipping? We're just going to pay our, you know, all of our employees enough so that tips aren't needed?
I think you're hearing that more and more in other cities, especially cities where there's just a higher minimum wage. I think, you know, locally, I think restaurant owners would really have to look at paying beyond $7.25 to make that appealing in this job market.
And of course, we have a strong market of restaurant workers here. A lot of folks do work in restaurants, and they depend on those tips. Those are an important source of income for them.
And there are a lot of restaurants that are that non-traditional front of house, back of house. You think of the different places you go up and you order at the counter, maybe someone brings it out, you see someone come out from the kitchen to bring your food. So I think there's still a lot to be figured out with this.
But have you noticed increasingly they're starting to suggest what the tip should be? Like on some checks at the bottom, they'll have a breakdown by percentage with the tip. Or if they have those screens that you need to sign, you know, they give you the option that you feel shameful if you don't put the I think, okay, for signing. And so they're kind of suggesting more and more.
Right. Well, tips are something that certainly, as a restaurant customer, we're used to giving. Like we said, we really should be, because those folks work hard to serve us. All right. Thanks a lot, Catherine. Stephanie, budget. State budget. The
Bigger
governor.
figures we're talking about
Yeah,
here.
right.
Yes.
The governor revealed his budget, which he says really isn't. It's not
Right.
one that he wants to indeed pursue. But if the money's not there, this is what he's going to have to do.
He, you know, sometimes budgets are wish lists. Sometimes they are just kind of a statement of what an administration would like to do, and it's dead on arrival at the legislature, Washington too. This one, nobody wants. This one, everyone disowned from the moment it was introduced, and even before. The governor is mandated to produce a budget that is based on the available revenue under current law. So we've got this thing called the fiscal cliff, which we've all been hearing about for 2 years now. And if you're tired of hearing about it, I'm sorry, because
It's still there.
It's still there. And, you know, it's there. It is June 30th. That's when more than $1 billion in temporary taxes that were passed 2 years ago, with the idea that it would make the legislature do something, you know, come up with a more permanent stream, either stream of revenue or identify cuts. This was supposed to happen last year. It didn't happen last year. So now we're in this kind of race against the clock. You know, we have till the end of the year, but there's a long regular session, and under state law this year, the legislature cannot raise revenue during that session. So that's March 12th through June. So basically, if this happens, it has to happen before or after in a special session. So the governor would really like it to happen before, and to get this settled, and to go into the legislature, into the regular session, be able to pass a budget that's the real budget, that's, you know, includes TOPS, includes money for hospitals, because as always, higher education and healthcare are the two areas that are most vulnerable because they're not protected.
So under this budget, it's an 80% cut to TOPS.
To TOPS, it's $233 million to TOPS. It's $660 million to healthcare. As the governor says, that puts these public-private partnerships for indigent care really at risk.
Right.
And it comes at a time, if they don't do it before March, you know, think of that March to June period. That's when people are deciding where to go to college. That's when, you know, people are coming up with their budgets. That's when, you know, the hospitals, if they have to lay people off, they have to issue layoff notices. So they would be preparing those if they don't know. So, you know, the governor and some people in the legislature are saying, this is ridiculous. We know what the options are. There was a legislative task force that came out with some ideas that the governor mostly supports.
So this is to raise revenue?
This is to raise revenue. There's a group, a Republican group in the House, that is really kind of staunchly against raising revenue and saying we need to cut. And, you know, clearly there will be some sort of compromise there. But part of the problem is that the governor is negotiating with Taylor Barra, the House Speaker, and he would also like to do something, by all accounts, before the regular session, but he doesn't have all of his people with him. You have Cameron Henry, who's the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, who's out there publicly saying, you know, I don't think we need a special session. I think, you know, there's money to be cut here. And, you know, it's all wrapped up in party politics and the fact that the governor is up for re-election next year and everyone's jockeying, as is everybody in the legislature.
So the reaction to the governor's budget, he was criticized by at a couple of
Yes.
agencies for just what they call not enough transparency. What are you talking about here in terms of cuts, really?
Right, and again, that's a big bone of contention. You know, who is supposed to identify the cuts, the governor or the legislature? What the governor keeps saying is, you know, you say we can cut, show me where we can cut, and then we can have a public debate about whether these are cuts people will accept as opposed to new revenue.
So special session would have to come in February.
It would. It
We're
would be right
knocking on
after
the
Mardi
door.
Gras.
We're knocking on the door
governor
of
had a
February.
deadline. He kind of issued something of an ultimatum, which he has now kind of stepped back from. If the legislature didn't come to him, and again, it's the House, it's not the Senate, because these measures have to originate in the House, and the kind of key committees have really been stacked with conservatives. So it's very ideological. He said if if the House doesn't come to me with, a plan, I'm not going to call you into special session. That was as of January 19th. We're now beyond January 19th, so they're still talking. So there is still some hope.
Okay, well, maybe they're talking and getting together and trying to come to some agreement in Washington, D.C. while they're having some parties
You
up
know
there.
what? I've been to Washington Mardi Gras. I'm obviously not there this year. It's one place where Democrats and Republicans really come together because everyone's partying. So it's a good thing.
Right. Errol, what do you think about that Mardi Gras ball in Washington?
Well, first, to me, part of the story, a big part of the story, is the location, the Washington Hilton, which is one of the most famous rooms in Washington. It's the biggest ballroom that there is in Washington, and it's and the Louisiana Mardi Gras Ball is a big event. It's a coveted event. The people over there love to have it. It's the place where Ronald Reagan was shot leaving. He was at the convention. He was right outside the carport. It's also that famous scene of Barack Obama the night he was at a press club event, and he was kind of joking. At the same time, the Navy SEALs were leaving to go after Barack Obama, and they showed him.
Osama bin Laden.
Osama bin Laden.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Barack Obama, Osama bin Laden. But the Washington Ball has been around, started in the 40s, and kind of came and went, and at wartime and turnovers and all that. It started to solidify in the 1950s, and the guy who really built it was Russell Long, Huey's son. And so that's probably the last vestige of the Long era. But he did a good job of building. He's the guy who ultimately moved it to the Washington Hilton in the 1970s. And it has become a powerful force for bringing a lot of people together. And it's always had a structure where, at least on paper, it is members of Congress who run it, like the committee and the captain. The captain this year is Steve Scalise, and the chairman of the ball is Congressman Garrett Graves. And David Vitter had a long term as captain, and so just a lot of people from Louisiana go there. It's kind of interesting, though, that who the people in power get to pick the king and the queen, and so the king is Todd Graves, who's the CEO of the
Raising Cane.
of Raising Cane's, and the queen is Miss Riley, who's the granddaughter of Kevin Riley, he's deceased now, but he was a longtime state legislator and connected with Lamar Advertising, which was a big business out of Baton Rouge. But the events actually really start on Thursday, where a lot of independent organizations will have, like crawfish boils, and it goes on Thursday and Friday, and then the ball Saturday night. And after the ball, there's still a lot of parties. I know Jefferson Parish, for example, traditionally has a party on Saturday night. And then they also bring in a lot of girls who are queens of different festivals, and they fly them all in at once. It's quite a sight. And so from Thursday through Saturday, New Orleans or Louisiana pretty much dominates.
Right. A sought after ticket this year, I understand, too.
Apparently more sought. It always is sought after, but apparently more so than ever. And there's a huge Baton Rouge contingent, obviously, with the Riley family and the Graves family, and the two Graves families, Garrett Graves and Todd Graves. They're not related. It was interesting. Last year, it was a lot of Jefferson Parish people because the king was. It was Thomas Warner from Ochsner, and his daughter was the queen, and Steve Scalise was both the chair and the captain. So, you definitely kind of see it move around the state.
Right.
And the main event is they borrow from Bacchus, which is that, Bacchus introduced having parades inside a big hall. Well, they have a parade, but it's a parade with miniature floats. And every Washington official from Louisiana has his own float, and it's really festive.
Well, I guess they're having fun up there. I don't think they're socked in with a snowstorm. I remember one year that the weather was really, really
2
pretty
years
awful,
ago,
and
I
they
think.
couldn't leave the hotel because the weather was so bad. And I don't think they had a problem with that too much either. Okay, thanks a lot, both of you guys. Over to Catherine. And the Best Restaurant Group is making some changes in terms of their presence in hotels.
That's right. So Best Restaurant Group, we're continuing to see some news out of that company since my colleague Brett Anderson's investigation into sexual harassment claims within the restaurant group. So as you know, Chef John Besh stepped away from operations of the company. They have a new CEO. And more recently, the company spun off their restaurants, but they have contracts to operate in hotels. So that would be all the food service in the Pontchartrain Hotel, which includes the Caribbean Room, and then some restaurants in a hotel in Nashville. So two former BRG executives went with that company, and they say it's a completely separate operation now, and that they're going to focus on their standalone restaurants like August, Luke, Bourne.
So it has completely broken. I mean, this new company now that's overseeing the hotel restaurants has nothing at all to do with the company that it sprung from.
Apparently so, yes.
No, but that's kind of interesting. So
Yeah, I think they're just looking to streamline and really focus on the brands that I think mean the most to them right now.
So now this new group is running the Caribbean Room, will be overseeing the Caribbean Room and the other restaurants that the Best Restaurant Group had been in beforehand?
That's right, and you have Emery Whalen and Brian Landry who have moved over to lead that company. So, I mean, these are people who know the Best Restaurant Group well.
Okay, well, we'll see how that one works out then. Thanks a lot, Catherine. Okay, I'm going to go back over to Stephanie right now. And there was some action out of City Hall that really caused some consternation. Can you explain what that was all about?
Sure. I mean, there are some controversies you can't avoid. This one, by all accounts, they really just bumbled into. And the council passed a non-binding resolution. It's something they do somewhat often on, climate change, minimum wage, issues that their largely Democratic constituents would pretty much agree on, and it's just a statement of principle. It's not binding. But what they did is they passed, this was 2 weeks ago, January 11th, they passed a resolution in support that basically, it was called a human rights sort of statement, and it was basically saying that the city shouldn't do business with companies that violate human rights. If you read it on paper, it's very innocuous, nobody would disagree with it. Turns out, it is something that is kind of connected to a movement called BDS, Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, that is very focused on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And, the idea of boycotting is aimed at the state of Israel and, and over treatment of Palestinians and this, thing that the city council is absolutely qualified to, weigh in on and try to solve. But so the council didn't mention, and the other thing that happened, it was done in kind of a procedural way that did not really allow for public input. It was, introduced and passed on the same day at the end of a long meeting. It blew up. There are Jewish groups in town that were very upset about this, feel like it was an anti-Israel statement. Mitch Landry was very upset about it. He said this is not the city's policy. Bill Cassidy criticized it. And at the same time, these groups that had been kind of talking to the council, really stuck to their guns. And what happened is the city council president, Jason Williams, came back last week and said, we blew it. We didn't get what we were wading into here. We're not trying to be divisive. We will rescind it. And, the kind of interesting thing is he did that before LaToya Cantrell, who was still on the city council and was the author of this, even though she was not there at the meeting. She kind of followed up with a similar statement a couple days later. So what happened is there was a meeting Thursday over in Algiers because the city council chamber is under renovation, so it's kind of a small space. Tons of people on both sides showed up. They couldn't fit in. It was very, raucous, and the council did rescind.
It.
Yeah.
To the protest of the Palestinian support groups.
Exactly, who were very upset, who, said, look, you're
said,
not, you're going back on your word to us.
Well, and basically said this really wasn't the intent, was not, anti-Israel, but this really did cause a brouhaha beyond our borders. I mean, this was a national, international story.
It is, because this would have been the first city to make such a statement. Things like this, people try to, come up with lists of cities and prominent people who support your cause, and New Orleans would have been a big one.
As you said, LaToya Cantrell authored this, so there was some controversy on this resolution, all right? But now
Yes.
there is some growing controversy regarding her transition team.
Yes.
And they're having to sign a
Non-disclosure agreements,
a
which
legal
is
agreement.
something that people here really haven't heard of before. It's something that you hear about connected to, say, Donald Trump, but not city council, city hall. She appointed a 15-member transition board. She's now appointed a bunch of subcommittees, people to work on different issues. And her transition is asking them to sign non-disclosure forms. The main board forever. It sounds like the kind of subcommittees for the length of the transition. And it's interesting because they are kind of saying this is about transparency. And
But nobody can talk about what they're talking about.
Right. And what they're saying is that it's the ability of city workers, city contractors to come to the transition committee members and tell them ideas, what's wrong, complaints, this isn't working, that isn't working, without fear of repercussions.
Well, that's meeting. This whole idea is really meeting with a lot
of resistance.
Yeah, and
my colleague
controversy.
Jeff Adelson interviewed Robert Travis Scott from the Public Affairs Research Corp, who said this is not government transparency. It won't work. It will have a chilling effect. And it's interesting because the whole Cantrell campaign was really, how many times did we hear her say bottom up? And this is something that's very top down.
And transparency. Of course, the Cantrell camp says, no, this has been done, this is the way it's done, and this is the way to do it.
And it is something that's done during campaigns. I mean, I read something about the Hillary Clinton campaign where people had to sign, but that's during a campaign. And so this is something different, and it'll be interesting to see what happens.
It will be interesting to see what happens and where this goes. Okay, it's now time to look ahead. Errol.
Well, people in New Orleans are starting to realize that there are two traditional days coming up. One is very festive and one is very solemn. Unfortunately, this year they're both on the same day, and that is Valentine's Day is going to be on Ash Wednesday. So people will have to get their ashes and smell the roses on the same day. So.
Yes, they will. Okay, Steph.
We've all been hearing about Congress putting things off, the Children's Health Insurance Program, dealing with immigration. They're also putting off dealing with the National Flood Insurance Program, possibly for another year. It expired last fall, and they've been temporarily reauthorizing it. I have a column actually in the Sunday's paper about why that's probably a good thing.
Okay, we'll be reading that. Catherine.
So staying on my theme today, I'm really interested to see how things shake out in the restaurant industry. You're starting to get a sense that there's sort of a groundswell of restaurant workers maybe waking up to some of their rights, whether it's sexual harassment claims or wages. And so I think we're on the cusp of some changes.
Okay, Richard.
Well, I was going to predict that I think the Patriots are going to win the Super Bowl in 2 weeks, but rather than do that, all this talk about Washington Mardi Gras reminded me
so
that
surprised.
Crew de Vue is tomorrow,
Oh, yeah.
and I think that's really where the movers and shakers are going to be.
Absolutely.
Out in the rain.
Noted local geographer Richard Campanella is the king, and I think that's going to be great.
If only they can endure the weather, that's the one challenge, so.
I'll be there.
Yeah, the rain hopefully will be gone. You're right. That is the parade. That's really definitely where the movers and shakers are. And are we surprised that he predicts the Patriots will win? Absolutely not. Thank you guys for joining us here, and thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
The firm of Bowen, McLeod & Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.